Hello, we're here at the Hagen History Center at the Morrison House, and we're going to talk a little bit about St. Patrick's Day. My name's Andy Roth. I'm a scholar in residence at the Jefferson Educational Society, and for the last 4 to 5 years have been doing a program called The American Tapestry at the Chautauqua Institution, and also a podcast on WQLN NPR that you can find on the WQLN website. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about St. Patrick's Day, which, depending upon when you see this, is either tomorrow, St. Patrick's Day itself, or perhaps you're seeing it later after the fact. In any event, we're at the Hagen History Center, and this program is a subset of that American Tapestry project I mentioned a moment ago. The subset is what I call American Holidays. And what we're trying to do in the American Tapestry Project is to, in these polarized times, discover the things that Americans have in common. As St. Augustine said, the common objects of our love are those things that bind a culture together. And one of the common objects of Americans' love is holidays. There are, in fact, 296 holidays on the time and date calendar that say Americans celebrate. And one of the categories of American holidays is, in fact, ethnic holidays, cultural celebrations of our immigrant ethnic heritage. And of course, the most famous of those is St. Patrick's Day. And as I said a moment ago, you're either listening to this the day before St. Patrick's Day, perhaps on St. Patrick's Day itself, or viewing it at a later time. Whether or not you're one of the 32 million Americans, approximately 9.7% of the population, whether or not you're one of the 32 million Americans who claim some Irish ancestry, St. Patrick's Day is the day everyone becomes Irish, at least for the length of time it takes to drown the Shamrock or to down a pint of Guinness, about which, as they say in Ireland, no beer comes near. Although I'm not Irish, I have a special affinity for the day because my wife Judy, that's Judy at St. Stephen's Green in Dublin, my wife Judy is Irish, and doubling down on her Irish heritage, she was born on St. Patrick's Day. So, happy birthday, Bobs. That's an inside joke. So in any event, wishing my wife happy birthday on St. Patrick's Day. One of the things that's interesting about this, in addition to that, my interest in St. Patrick's Day and my love of all things Irish and Ireland grew out of a project that I was involved in, almost 35 or 37 years ago, when I created, or I was one of the people who established, an Irish Scholars and Student Exchange Program. We did that about 37 years ago, working with Father Pat Moran. Father Moran is the late Pat Moran, unfortunately, of St. Augustine's College in Dungarvan, Ireland. We created an Irish Scholars Exchange Program, and through that, I had the opportunity to meet some tremendous young people like Donna Shaffrey, who actually went back to Ireland and is a solicitor there, Yvonne Marr, Noreen Herlihy, Fiona McGettigan, John Deasy, who is a member of the Irish Dáil, the Irish Parliament, and I suspect this face is well known to Erie'ites, John Melody, who is a well-known local entrepreneur, investor, and backer of all things soccer. In any event, we created this Irish Scholarship Program, and one of the things it did is it afforded me the opportunity to go to Ireland. In fact, I went to Ireland so many times in the late 80s and early 90s, I used to joke that I didn't need road maps. This was long before GPS. And of course, having had that experience, I grew to love Irish culture, Irish history, and Irish literature. The experience, interestingly enough, in a kind of ironic twist, led me to a quintessential American experience. One March in the late 1980s or early 1990s, I don't exactly remember, I was invited by Erie's Irish Cultural Society to give a talk about the Irish Scholars Program and about Ireland in the 20th century. As I began my talk, I recall, I paused and said to the audience that I felt a bit discombobulated telling them about Ireland. For only in America could someone of German, actually Transylvania Saxon with a dash of Romanian and a dollop of Hungarian ancestry, Only in America could someone with that background stand before a group of Irish Americans and presume to tell them about Irish culture and their cultural heritage. For me, it was an example of the richness of American culture growing out of the fusion of many cultures. I still have the paperweight. They gave me, which is a shamrock embedded in a clear disc. And that experience actually tied in later to the American Tapestry Project I alluded to earlier, which, as I said a moment ago, you can find on WQLN NPR1's website and all the major podcast sites. St. Patrick's Day and all of America's ethnic holidays also connect to other threads in the American tapestry. They are freedom's fault lines, tales of race and gender, the immigrant's tale, and what I call the fusion thread, the ever-expanding inclusiveness of the we in we the people. And this is a mosaic of America's immense immigrant heritage. In fact, I'll buy a beer to anyone who can identify who that young man is. It's a shot taken on a street in Hoboken, New Jersey, sometime in the late 1920s, early 1930s. But what I'm interested in, I'm looking at a couple of people here as a very small audience as we record this program. Kind of slipped there. Tape is a long gone thing. It's Frank Sinatra. In any event, as I said, the whole essence of the American Tapestry Project is the we the people, the ever-expanding definition, ever-expanding inclusiveness of the we and we the people. Freedom's Fault Lines, for example, tells of all the times America excluded people because of race, ethnicity, or gender, excluded them from all of freedom's benefits, and the excludeds fight for inclusion by appealing to America's foundational values of freedom, equality, and liberty, and opportunity. The immigrant's tale overlaps with freedom's fault lines at every turn in America's history. The archetypal immigrant cycle of arrival, nativist anti-immigrant discrimination, the fight for inclusion, gradual inclusion, and by the third or fourth generation, the immigrants' descendants' complete assimilation into American culture, so that it is now they, ironically enough, who oppose the new Americans. And then the cycle repeats itself. While the cycle repeats itself, it does not negate the fusion thread, that ever-expanding we, the ever-expanding inclusiveness of the we and we the people, as immigrant wave after immigrant wave embeds itself in American culture. Many in our current polarized culture want to permanently stop that cycle and freeze us into some version of white Anglo-Christians. But America's immigrant heritage enriches all of us. In an article in the New Yorker some years ago, during one of our periodic squabbles about immigration policy, Calvin Trillin offered the opinion that he'd base immigration policy on national cuisine. He joked that he'd admit just about everybody except the English. That was a joke. America's immigrant heritage, by the way, makes American food among the world's most bounteous. In America, you can find just about every kind of food. We have menu options that range from curry chicken to spaghetti and meatballs, which it might surprise some people to discover isn't an Italian dish, and it's an Italian-American dish. I'll comment about that later. To hamburger, which is German. To French fries, which are actually Belgian pommes frites. To hot dogs, which is German. To, of course, America's favorite food, which is Italian, but in America has become a thing unto itself, pizza. It's a long, long way from colonial boiled beef. Another example of America's immigrant heritage enriching American culture is the ever-growing number of ethnic holidays celebrating some groups' ancestral background. For example, in Erie, we have all summer long a rich mosaic of cultural and ethnic festivals, from August's Zabawa Polish Festival to the Italian Festival in August, also in August, to German Heritage in September, to the Greek Festival in July, to the Russian Festival in June. We have every weekend all summer long. You can go to some festival where some group is celebrating their ancestors' cultural heritage. Nationally, There are over 74, and that's a low number, I'm still counting. There are at least, so I'll say there are at least 74 days or months designated the day honoring a given ethnicity's Day of Honor. They range from April 6th, National Tartan Day, honoring people of Scots heritage, to May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, honoring Mexican heritage, to March 1st, St. David's Day, honoring the Welsh, to Asian Pacific heritage and Jewish American heritage in May, to the Chinese New Year in February, and countless others. Why ethnic holidays? Why ethnic festivals? Several reasons come to mind. From the most benign, in which the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, or the great to whatever nth applies to your particular lineage, until those grandchildren or descendants fondly recall their ancestors' voyage to the New World and for a day dip their toes into the old customs. In contrast to those benign motives, ethnic holidays also find their origin in other, darker, not so positive assertions of ethnic dignity and solidarity as the new Americans, as the immigrants, stood their ground against native bigotry. Just as today, previous immigrants, earlier immigrants, encountered vicious anti-immigrant sentiments, such as in the 19th century, signs that said, Irish need not apply, or attacking Irish and German Catholics in the middle of the 19th century, no rum in Romanism, or the Know Nothing Party in the early middle 19th century that opposed immigration. It was called actually the American Party. It got its nickname, the Know Nothing Party, because people were embarrassed to be associated with it publicly, so then asked about it, they would say, I know nothing. So that's where its name came from. To politicians excoriating Italian-American immigrants as the mongrel scum of Southern Europe. And that led to things like the Immigration Restriction League. So ethnic holidays were actually founded by immigrant peoples to push back against that. And two that we'll be looking at today, Columbus Day and St. Patrick's Day, both the two most widely celebrated ethnic holidays in America, those two share these roots. Columbus Day, for example, was first celebrated in 1792 when New York's Columbian Order, better known as Tammany Hall, held an event to commemorate the 300th anniversary of Columbus's historic landing. Forgotten for 100 years, it was revived in 1892 by President Benjamin Harrison. He resurrected the day as he was reacting to intense pressure from Italian-American immigrant societies, from the Knights of Columbus, from the government of Italy itself, to do something about anti-Italian bigotry, which had culminated in the lynching of 11 Italian immigrants in New Orleans. So, ostensibly honoring Christopher Columbus, Harrison created the day, which Franklin Roosevelt made an official holiday in 1934, on October 12th, designating October 12th Columbus's birthday, which the Uniform Holiday Act of 1968 has confused that. It no longer necessarily falls on October 12th. I think it's the second Monday of October. But in any event, that was designed not so much, interestingly enough, to honor Christopher Columbus, but as to honor Italian-American heritage. Now, 130 years later, Columbus Day is attacked for honoring someone who is allegedly, or was allegedly, the exploiter of native peoples. In many communities, Columbus Day is morphing into Italian-American Heritage Day. In fact, October has become Italian-American Heritage Month. And in some communities, like Akron, Ohio, it's becoming Indigenous Peoples Day. And in some communities, it's all three. St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day emerged earlier in American culture than you might think, like Columbus Day. It emerged much earlier. And it only became a pushback against anti-immigrant bias in the middle of the 19th century. The earliest St. Patrick's Day recorded was in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1600. And the first St. Patrick's Day parade in America was in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1601. In 1737, the Charitable Irish Society of Boston held the first observance in the British colonies, honoring St. Patrick's Day, and that was on March 16th, 1737. Surprisingly, for some people, the celebration wasn't Catholic. It was because the earliest Irish immigrants in the 17th and early 18th century were in fact Protestants. And they dominated Irish culture at that time. Similar to Boston's, the first celebration of St. Patrick's Day in New York City was in John Marshall's home. He was an Irish Protestant, and that occurred on March 16, 1762. And the first St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City was conducted by Irish soldiers in the British Army on St. Patrick's Day, 1766. But, as I alluded to a moment ago, that all changed in the mid-19th century as Irish Catholic immigration soared. In the 19th century, confronted by those "No Irish Need Apply" signs and intense anti-Catholic bigotry, the newly arrived Irish Americans, overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, formed Irish aid societies like the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, the Hibernian Society. In a show of solidarity, they gradually co-opted New York's St. Patrick's Day parade, and by 1848, it had become America's largest parade. Today, St. Patrick's Day is celebrated everywhere, but it is, interestingly enough, only a legal holiday in two communities: in Boston, Suffolk County, Massachusetts, in Boston, and in Savannah, Georgia. Savannah, Georgia's, that heritage is because of a large Protestant Irish community that lived there in the late 17th and early and middle 18th century, and in the early 19th century, they made it a formal holiday. In Suffolk County, Boston, which most people, I suspect Savannah, Georgia, somewhat, particularly the Erie'ites, a little bit of a surprise to know that St. Patrick's Day is an official holiday there. But Boston, everyone associates the Irish with Boston and assumes that that's a holiday there. Interestingly, there's a backstory to how St. Patrick's Day became a holiday in Boston. Actually, March 17th was a major day in the history of Boston and had been a day of celebration since the American Revolution. It's called Evacuation Day, but it had never been made an official holiday. It was made an official holiday in 1901 when Boston's Brahmins realized that their holiday, Evacuation Day, which celebrated the British retreat and withdrawal from the occupation of Boston on March 17, 1776, at the beginning of the American Revolution, when they realized their holiday was getting subsumed under the new Irish immigrant St. Patrick's Day holiday, so they made Evacuation Day and St. Patrick's Day both official holidays. Actually, for the Irish, it's a double win. They got their holiday, and it's a holiday that also celebrates defeating the British. So for the Irish, it was a win-win. Currently, St. Patrick's Day is among the top 10 holidays in consumer spending. It comes in at number 9, $42, and we'll round that up. The average American, and if you multiply that by 330 million, you get a big number. The average American spends $43 on St. Patrick's Day, which I suspect is on corned beef and cabbage, the odd, as we will see later, item of green apparel, but primarily, I suspect, you'll discover that is spent on alcohol. St. Patrick's Day is the major day for the consumption of alcohol. We'll come back to that later. So he said it's in the top 10, and as it has become amongst one of the top 10 holidays in American culture, it has transcended its Irish roots in many ways and become an American holiday, a holiday for all Americans. Although interestingly enough, an example of cultural reverse or reverse cultural sharing, St. Patrick's Day in Ireland is increasingly being celebrated the way Irish Americans celebrate it. It's a bigger holiday in America than it is in Ireland. In Ireland, it remains mostly a religious observance observing St. Patrick himself. It is not the kind of mass public celebration. But as I said, in a kind of reverse cultural transmission, Irishmen are adopting Irish American ways of celebrating St. Patrick's Day. But St. Patrick's Day is a bigger holiday in America than it is in Ireland. But nonetheless, the fact that the Irish still celebrate it more or less as a religious observance, that raises the question, who was St. Patrick? Most people, when you ask them who was St. Patrick, they'll say he drove the snakes out of Ireland, which may or may not be true. Any event, who was St. Patrick? Was he real? Did he actually exist? The answer to which is yes. St. Patrick is credited with bringing Christianity to the Irish. He flourished in the 5th century, that is the 400s. He's only known because of 2 short writings that he left. One is his Confessio, the Confession of St. Patrick. He wouldn't have known who St. Augustine was. In fact, they were actually roughly contemporaries, but it would be similar to the Confessions of St. Augustine. It's his description of how he became Christian. And then his letter or epistle to Coroticus. Coroticus was an ancient British warrior known for brutalizing and selling into slavery his Irish conquest. The letter is a denunciation of British mistreatment of the Irish. Some things are very, very old. Interestingly enough, St. Patrick wasn't Irish. Born in Britain to wealthy Romano-British parents, you got to remember the Roman Empire had a presence in Britain till deep into the 4th and 5th century AD. London was once Londondymian. In any event, born in Britain to wealthy British Romano or Romano-British parents, at 16, St. Patrick was captured by Irish raiders. Plunder went in both directions across the Irish Sea in the first millennium, and he was carried into slavery in Ireland. Enslaved for 6 years as a shepherd, herdsman, his religious fervor increased. He dreamt of escape. He managed finally to flee his master and find his way back to Britain. In Patrick's Confessio's most famous passage, he tells of a dream that he had in which he receives a letter which he called the Voice of the Irish. Reading it, he heard the Irish plead for his return. Deeply moved, he says, I could read no more. He says he felt unfit for the task, which, if you look at the lives of the saints, is a very common reaction of the person chosen to say they're unfit for the task. They are reluctant to go because they feel they are unfit and unable to do it. Think of Moses telling God he's not the one. For a long time, Patrick was reluctant to accept the call. Once back in Ireland, his qualms disappeared. He roved all over Ireland, zealously converting the pagans. An instinctive diplomat, he brought gifts to the warrior Irish and other powerful foes, but he never brought a gift or never accepted a gift himself. On at least one occasion, he was cast into chains. He lived in constant danger of martyrdom. Humble, he thanked God for picking him or choosing him to bring flocks of pagans, to get flocks of pagans to forsake worshiping idols and unclean things and to join the people of God. By the end of the 7th century, he was a legend. The legends, certainly apocryphal and exaggerated, continue to grow. The most famous legend, of course, is that he drove the snakes out of Ireland and into the sea. He himself wrote that he raised people from the dead. A 12th century saint's life, 700 years later, says the number was 33, some of whom had been dead for years. So that was St. Patrick. Why March 17th? Most people, if you were to ask them at Saturday's St. Patrick's Day parade, most people would tell you it's St. Patrick's birthday, which it's not. No one knows exactly when his birthday was. It's actually allegedly the day he died. And he is buried or entombed would be more accurate than buried. That is the tomb of St. Patrick at Down Cathedral in Downpatrick, Northern Ireland. It's the scene or the site of a Benedictine monastery that's been there since approximately 1183. Of those various legends about St. Patrick, why Shamrocks? Well, if St. Patrick's most famous legend is that he drove the snakes out of Ireland, his most popular legend involves the Shamrock. In a brilliant, one might say ingenious, if not inspired, teaching metaphor, St. Patrick explained the Holy Trinity, 3 persons in one God, to bewildered Irish pagans by showing them the 3-leaved plant with 1 stalk. The only Trinitarian metaphor I've ever heard that's as ingenious as St. Patrick's was in a completely different cultural context. Eldridge Cleaver's famous comment in Soul on Ice when asked to explain the Trinity, he said 3 in 1 oil. I'm not sure what St. Patrick would think of that, but that's the history of the Shamrock. How is this brilliant teacher in Evangelist Day celebrated? Well, it is true that some managed to find their way to church. This is St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and of course this is Erie's St. Patrick's Church, while it's true that many, or some, or a few, do manage to find their way to church, most, if the weather cooperates even a little bit, put on their green, take in a parade, have a wee bit of a dram of Ishkabaha, which is Irish for whiskey, it means water of life, or a glass of stout, or both, munch a plate of corned beef and cabbage, and generally spend the day in a pleasant revel. Why all the green clothing, green beer, and even rivers of dyed green? Ireland is really green. I mean green in a rich, lush, almost sensuous way. It's a cliche, but if you've ever had the opportunity to fly over Ireland or to drive through its countryside, the ever-shifting shades of green are dazzling. As a result, the phrase "wearing of the green" became iconic in the Irish nationalist movement. When Ireland achieved its independence in 1922, one of the first things the Irish Free State did was paint all the post boxes green. Now, if you've been to Britain, that is England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, you would know that all British mailboxes are red. So the first thing the Irish did was to paint all of the post boxes, which would be ubiquitous all over the country, was to paint them green under the slogan, "Green paint for a green people." Green gradually became associated with St. Patrick and the defining color of the Irish people and Irish nationalism. On St. Patrick's Day, green is everywhere. In Seattle, they paint the stripe down the street of the parade route green. In Chicago, ever since 1962, they dye the Chicago River green. In 1962, some sewer workers looking for damaged sewer discharges used green dye, and then they had the idea, it must have occurred relatively close to St. Patrick's Day, they would just dye the river green, and every St. Patrick's Day since 1962, they dye the Chicago River green. And neighboring, nearby, Jamestown, New York, every St. Patrick's Day, they dye the Chautauqua River green, and this is that. And of course, everyone's familiar with green beer. What about those parades? Well, although the custom began long ago, the largest is in New York City. But every, or almost every, American city has a St. Patrick's Day parade. If the weather is warm, Cleveland's parade turns into a carnival in which Public Square, which is kind of obscured here in that collage I created, in which Public Square becomes a veritable sea of green, of people arrayed in green. Some of them might even be Irish. Erie has one every March, but it does not always fall on St. Patrick's Day, as we know. Only the most extreme snow or cold weather can deter the revelers, although COVID-19 postponed it a year ago, and it's been revived this year. One sees everyone from Mayor Schember to Brady Lewis saluting the Irish with their shillelagh and heading to Sullivan's Pub or the Tap House or Molly Brannigan's or some other suitable venue to have that wee bit of a dram of Ishkabaha. Speaking of Ishkabaha, St. Patrick's Day is one of the leading days for the consumption of alcohol. Drinking artificially flavored green beer, or artificially colored, doesn't flavor, artificially colored green beer is common. In the carnival atmosphere surrounding many parades and other St. Patrick's Day revels, drinking Irish whiskey or beers become essential. I've already mentioned downing a pint of Guinness, which, as they say in Ireland, no beer comes near. But there's another custom that Americans are beginning to adopt. It's historically popular in Ireland, and it's the custom of drowning the shamrock or wetting the shamrock. At the end of the celebrations, a shamrock is put into the bottom of a glass. The glass is then filled with whiskey or beer. A toast is made. A toast is made to St. Patrick, to Ireland, and to those present. Then the shamrock is either swallowed or taken out and tossed over one's shoulder as a sign of good luck. The plate of corned beef and cabbage, accompanied by Irish soda bread and the beverage of your choice, curiously enough, like many American ethnic foods, is not Irish in its origin. While the soda bread is authentically Irish, the meal of corned beef and cabbage was created by Irish Americans in the 19th century. It's similar to what happened to other ethnic groups. They brought their customs and foods to America, but in America they were gradually transformed into something else. They became American foods, food for Americans. The classic example I mentioned earlier, although there are literally dozens and dozens, the classic example might be spaghetti and meatballs. You'll search in vain for anything resembling American-style spaghetti and meatballs in Italy. You just won't find it. Well, maybe in some really touristy places you might find it, but generally speaking, you'll not find it. It's an American dish. The food is a metaphor for new Americans' assimilation into American culture. While the food's roots, like the person's, lie in the old country, in the soil of the new world, they become something else. They become American. In becoming American, they change and enrich America. It's the essence of what I call the immigrant's tale. A glimpse into Irish American identity emerges in the changing character of St. Patrick's Day, from originally a Protestant celebration to an ethnic attempt by immigrant Irish in the 19th century to push back against nativist bigotry. It has now become, almost 200 years later, the symbol of Irish achievement. Now, almost 200 years later, in the 21st century, St. Patrick's Day has become a profound expression of Irish American assimilation and Irish American achievement. Tracing that achievement of Irish Americans goes through all facets of American culture. Sports. Irish immigrants dominated the early history of baseball, from John McGraw to Roger Connor, the original home run king, from Nellie Kelly in the Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Irish Americans dominated baseball in its first 50, 60, maybe even 70 years. To politics, from Tammany Hall, the first mayor of New York, and Alfred E. Smith, to John F. Kennedy and Joe Biden. This is William Grace, Gracie's mansion. He was the first Irish mayor of New York City. And the city hall, and the mansion that the mayor lives in, Gracie's mansion, is named after him. From sports and politics to entertainment, the arts and commerce, Walt Disney and Bruce Springsteen are Irish. To Erie's own, Dr. Gertrude Barber. Well, to talk about the accomplishments of Irish Americans and their achievements and what they've done in American society, that'd be a whole other presentation. But as a result, every year since 1991, March has been proclaimed Irish American Heritage Month. It's the quintessential American story. As that story is told through the shifting character of St. Patrick's Day parades, the day's rituals and traditions, it reflects how not only Irish immigrants, but all immigrants enriched American culture. On St. Patrick's Day, if only for a moment, we need to stop and reflect how the experience of Irish Americans becoming a people to be celebrated and admired exemplifies the immigrant's tale. It's a major, major thread, maybe the major thread in the American tapestry's fusion thread of the ever-expanding inclusiveness of the we and we the people. Although widely celebrated by Irish and non-Irish alike, St. Patrick's Day is the Irish's day. So let's conclude this talk with, if only figuratively speaking, a wee bit of a dram of Uisce Baha, and say with our Irish neighbors, Éireann go bragh, Ireland forever. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you.